This is episode 574 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, I was up in the Capitol, up in the Roundhouse for the first time in 2024 during the legislative session. And we had discussed HB 41 last week on the program. That is the latest iteration of the Clean Fuel Standard. This one in particular would use the Environmental Improvement Board, yet another unelected body that the Democrats want to do their bidding. In this case, the idea would be to push some form of alternative fuels into our gas tanks. But what's most notable about the fact that I was in Santa Fe on a Saturday morning is the fact that I was in Santa Fe on a Saturday morning, because we are just a week into the session, and normally Saturday committee hearings don't kick in until at least 2 or 3 weeks into the legislative session. So what does this mean? Well, it means that this is a top priority for our friends who control the process there in Santa Fe. Most notably, again, on this is it has changed so dramatically. This is a piece of legislation that has evolved quite significantly, very prescriptive in its first iteration, then less so, and now it's just let the EIB deal with it, which, I can complain about the Democrats for a lot of things, but living up to their name is now one that I think they really need to be taken a task for. They do not believe in the democratic process. They believe in unelected boards that can make the tough decisions that they don't have to take the credit or blame for.
So maybe administrative crats. So yeah, the administrative rulemaking process, man, is that out of control at the federal level, and possibly soon to come at the state level. I was in Santa Fe yesterday as well, Paul, and I actually talked to a couple of legislators about the clean fuel standard and what's going on with that. Who knows right now? Maybe you could dump some more ethanol in there, but right now, Paul, you can buy 15% ethanol at the gas station. It's cheaper than regular gasoline. And at least in my neighborhood, I will not say that this is a scientific study, but nobody buys that. I look every time. It's cheaper, but hey, it absorbs water. There's lots of issues. And believe me, ethanol, if that's what we're going to dump more of to make our quote unquote fuel greener, that's, ethanol. Man, it's where you take 1,000 gallons of water and the equivalent of 1,000 gallons of energy in the form of various things to make another 1,000 gallons of ethanol. Not necessarily the way to go. And I don't know, Paul, did they talk about the potential increases? But the people I've talked to on this, I was saying, I think we could see 10-20 cent additional regular gasoline. Some of them, again, in the know in the industry, think it could be as high as 40 cents or more. So it's a extremely, I don't know. This is one of those. This is an ethereal type of thing that we're chasing, but the cost could be very real.
Yeah, and it is hard, and that's one of the many frustrations with this thing is that. But the way that they are attempting to avoid having a real conversation about it because it's so ill-defined. What are they actually doing? Is it ethanol? Is it something else? Ethanol, we've talked about it on this program, is widely recognized by environmentalists and others to be harmful overall because you have to plant all that corn, use the pesticides, get the machines out there. You lose what could be natural lands that you have to plow and till and plant and harvest. And that is a lot of CO2, a lot of man-made fossil fuels going into that whole process. So to what benefit and exactly what is this all going to look like? it's really hard to say, and it's unfortunate that that's what we've devolved to here in New Mexico. Is if you can't pass something straight up explaining what you're doing, you try to do it through empowering a unelected board and dumping it off on them. So
yeah, something's going to happen, something wonderful, but you'll have to stay, you have to pass it to see what's in it. So we've heard that before too.
So HB 41 did pass out of the House Environment Committee on a party line vote. Nothing surprising there. Although I was intrigued by the fact that there were, and Representative Larry Scott's the one who has the numbers talking about close to a 50-cent per gallon increase. And, we could have a discussion about raising the gas tax and et cetera, et cetera. That would be a conversation, at least it's transparent. You know what you're getting into. This, again, you really don't know, and it's hard to find an honest answer. There was a second bill. This committee hearing went very long. They heard HB 48, which is the increase in the royalties on oil and gas. Again, a royalty is a fancy way of saying a tax increase, but something that comes out of the ground. Pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, and New Mexico is getting into very much the hog territory when it comes to the oil and gas industry, and already driven by billions and billions of dollars and more spending growth, and now they want even more money. This partially is at least driven by the Land Commissioner Garcia Richard, who thinks that she can generate even more money from oil and gas by raising the taxes, and maybe she's right, but it is worth noting that New Mexico does not tax royalties the same way, or tax oil and gas the same way as other states. So you can compare and contrast with Texas and other neighboring states that have oil and gas all you want, but we charge the gross receipts tax on our energy producers as well, and all of the processes in the oil and gas drilling and extraction process. So it's not a apples to oranges comparison between us and Texas and other states that have oil and gas. So those two bills both passed their committee on a party line vote.
Yeah, and Paul, you may or may not know the answer, but my understanding is that this increase, it's on state trust lands, which is a significant but not the majority of production in New Mexico. And I believe it would only apply to new leases, not existing leases, because those lease contracts were signed between the oil companies and the state land office. And so most of the very, very, very good state trust land that has multiple layers that can be produced for many, many decades to come are already under lease. So this is one of those maybe trying to get more money out of the not quite so good lands. So it's almost backwards in terms of what you would think a tax is only a tax if people will pay it is the point of that. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, this is, of course, future, as you say. Thankfully, they're not trying to renegotiate past contracts, which would be hugely problematic. And the rate would increase from 1/5 of the value of the oil or natural gas produced to 1/4 of the value. So, again, one of the things that they'll say to justify these kinds of policies is, well, we haven't raised the tax in a long time. Well, of course, you're taxing a quarter, a fifth of the overall price. It's not like that is going down over time. Like if you said this was a $1 per gallon tax or something. No, this is based on the amount generated.
Yeah, it's a percentage, and the percentage by definition will rise with the value of the commodity if it does indeed rise over the years.
Yeah, so that's HB 48, and both of those, as I said, passed out of committee. The hearing on HB 41 was quite lengthy. There is a bill being heard this morning as we record this, HB 114, which Eric Rasmussen, the president of the New Mexico Firearms Industry Association, says would result in the destruction of the state's firearm industry. That's because HB 114 attempts to saddle the industry with all kinds of civil violations revolving around false advertising, quote unquote false advertising, that negatively impact public health, safety, or welfare that apply only to the firearm industry. Basically, this is the Attorney and Ambulance Chaser Full-Time Employment Act. It's just a way that they will, through the legislative process and ultimately the legal process, try to destroy the Second Amendment by saddling firearm sales and sales folk with all kinds of regulations and lawsuits that only apply to them, but will destroy their business and make it really next to impossible to own a gun in New Mexico. Do I think this bill will pass? I suspect not, but we'll know a lot more after HB 114 is heard and what results from that committee this morning.
Yeah, and Paul, this may be a one-hand clapping sort of bill as well. I'm just thinking to most of the gun store advertising that I see, that I hear is on radio, and it tends to be, come to our gun store. We're a good place to buy guns. So you know what I mean? It's one of those, who knows, but in the world of lawsuits, you could say, well, no, it shouldn't be a good place to buy a gun. What are they going to say? So this is an interesting one, to put it mildly. So
yeah, well, keep an eye on HB 114. The governor's State of the State address happened the afternoon after we recorded last week's episode, and I think it was noteworthy for two things. One is that she started very late, which is no surprise there. Politicians, especially seemingly Democrats, tend to be very slow when it comes to these public events. They love to keep people waiting on pins and needles. Not really in our case, but I was trying to listen in to do some other media work relating to the state of the state, and it was just impossible to wait any longer. So we did something entirely different. Notably, the talk was interrupted 3 times by a combination. There's no other way to put it, aside from the protesters were a combination of pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine, and pro-environment, anti-fossil fuels. They were the same people, and they were literally protesting and yelling the same things as they interrupted the governor on 3 separate occasions. I guess the other notable thing is that the governor seemed to tacitly support them and called them courageous on multiple occasions. I don't think she would have had the same kind words for Second Amendment protesters, because if you think of any groups that would have been inclined to interrupt the speech and no one else did, it probably would have been folks concerned about their Second Amendment rights. I don't think they would have been courageous, though.
Yeah, well, and I did think that was an odd thing to say, but notwithstanding the fact that they were courageous, they still did show them the exit so that the speech could continue. So.
Yeah,
they were courageous out in the halls for the rest of the speech.
Those speeches are already long enough. The
last thing we need is long applause periods and protest in the middle of it.
And I will say that I don't, as I recall, there weren't. It wasn't as bad as some of the speeches have been in terms of applause lines, and I'm not sure if that's because the governor's speech wasn't worth applauding, even as a Democrat, or if they, I got the impression from watching it was much more laundry list-like, yes. And those things don't necessarily lend themselves to a lot of applause lines. She also did, kind of make a case for everything's hunky-dory here in New Mexico, and I'm doing an awesome job, and I think maybe even a lot of the Democrats in attendance are like, well, yeah, we happen to go to Albuquerque on occasion. We see what's happening across our state, and we know things are not doing particularly well in a lot of areas. You certainly aren't seeing the kind of results of the oil and gas boom that we would kind of expect to see in terms of broader prosperity across our state.
Yeah, you know, and Paula, there's a big contrast between the "everything is wonderful" line that, boy, that was strong in the, and I did not. I just I read the transcript, and hopefully it was close to what was actually said. But you know, compare and contrast that to education and big problems we have that with that, big problems we have with crime. So it's like not everything, as you say, is going splendidly here in the land of enchantment.
Yeah, and KOET Channel 7 did a fact check on that and pointed out some of the ways in which she was embellishing or twisting the facts, but won't go into that. One of the programs that she certainly loves is the New Mexico Film Subsidy Program, and the film office itself now has added their own study to the equation.
And Paul, thank you for those double air quotes for those of you who are listening to this. You read that thing, and man, I don't know what they're saying. They're saying that we get a lot of money, and boy, do we get a lot of benefits. But it is a little bit thin on exactly what their methodology of calculation of these benefits are. So
yeah, and if you want to take a look at this thing, it came out on December 8th, 2023, so it's relatively recent. It is linked at errorsofenchantment.com. And I think the fatal flaw, if you will, and in a report like this of dozens of pages, 36 pages of alleged justification for the film subsidies, they rely on a term called economic impact. And then they look at direct, indirect, induced, and total. And economic impact is a very broad, vague term. It's ill-defined in the report. And I'll just say that this report is not objective. It's not something that is credible. And it is, I think, a direct attempt to respond in some way, shape, or form to the Legislative Finance Committee's report, which again came out back in September and essentially trashed the film subsidies, doing so saying that among economic development programs in New Mexico, it was the least bang for the most bucks. And, we only respond to that. Yes, that is correct. And furthermore, economic development programs in general are poor ways to spend or not collect taxpayer dollars as a means of developing the economy. Across the board, tax cuts, reform of the gross receipts tax, regulatory reform, all of those would be much more efficient means of boosting New Mexico's economy. So even the LFC was kind of going for a second best approach, but at least you saw their methodology. It made sense. You could understand it, and they had it very well justified. This is like a Seinfeld episode that lasts 33 pages, and it's really a lot of talk about nothing.
Yeah, and Paul, IMPLAN, IMPLAN, is a model that is used in New Mexico, and I've used that before. And you enter a scant amount of data, and it just comes up with it for you. And that thing, the last I used it in any event, was very much of a black box. It's kind of like asking the Wizard of Oz, "Wizard, is this a good economic development plan?" And it will come back and tell you yes or no, and if so, by how much.
Yeah, and just hopefully by this time, especially post-COVID, people understand that government reports are often written with a very specific goal in mind, i.e. justifying whatever government's already doing. And especially when it's a report commissioned by the film office and it's done in such, I think, a haphazard and poorly defined way, it is easy to poke holes in it. And our analyses have always relied upon the idea of, does this program generate as many tax dollars as we spend? And that is the unique aspect of New Mexico's film program, is that we're actually cutting checks to Hollywood filmmakers. And even by the data produced by the film office, not in this report, but in other forums, you calculate based on the way that money is spent, or the fact that you have to generate economic activity to generate tax revenue at a certain rate, and then you're spending it, and it's filtering through the economy, and then it's ultimately taxed again. The film program comes nowhere close to breaking even. Other programs, if you forego taxes on gross receipts or property taxes or something, it's a lot more complicated, and I think that's where you get into the conversation with industrial revenue bonds that we've had on this show before. But the film industry, it's pretty cut and dried and pretty straightforward. Now, they were filming downtown in Albuquerque yesterday as we record this, right out front of my office. Downtown for the last week or two has been occupied by Hollywood filmmakers coming into our state and making a program called Duster, which I went and looked up. It's a 70s era kind of gangster show set in the American Southwest. I took some pictures because, we of course know that this governor is so committed to being green and environmentally sound, and just looking out the window, gazing at these very heavy trucks, none of which were EVs, with a generator set up, and then 70s show dealing with kind of. Let's just say that the Japanese invasion had not happened yet when it came to the automobile, at least as far as the program Duster is concerned, because all the cars are with what you call one of those classic 70s Land Cruisers, land yachts kind of cars. And it led me to a few things. One is, of course, green is only for industries that the governor does not care for, or individuals or people that the governor doesn't care for. So I think the Republicans in Santa Fe, or a principled Democrat, could introduce one bill to do a audit, a CO2 audit of New Mexico's film industry. That would be a really interesting argument for them to oppose. And the other would be to pass a EV mandate on Hollywood filmmakers coming to our state, that all the vehicles they drive need to be electric by 2026, just let's say when our EV mandate kicks in. I think that's the least they could do, right?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, because it's interesting. A lot of these regulations that are being put into play, we act like there's not cost to making these transitions. At first we did, and we said, well, the cost is so small, we'll just do incentives. But then once you start requiring it, then people really start to see what's happening. So I will not hold my breath on that one.
Oh, I'm not going to hold my breath. That's a different story. But
I got you. It's like, what's fair is fair, but fair is a relative concept, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I think we all know that the environmental principles espoused by our governor are for we, the little people, not for her. Speaking of which, and I just thought of this in the context of the environment, we're completely switching subjects. However, the governor has put $110 million in her budget to force all school districts in New Mexico to embrace a 5-day school week. We talked about this at some point or another because the PED was considering regulations that would have mandated the 5-day school week. Some districts have a 4-day school week in place, and those are predominantly rural districts that have kids on buses for 45 minutes or an hour. They hit all the requirements when it comes to classroom time. They just do it in a lengthened 4-day week as opposed to 5-day week. Of course, I don't need to say that from an environmental standpoint, 4-day school week makes a lot more sense than a 5-day school week. But what am I talking about here? We're only talking about when the governor wants these concepts. And I don't know exactly why the governor opposes this so strongly, aside from her visceral dislike for rural New Mexico. But according to districts in Missouri and Kansas where they have 4-day school weeks on a widespread basis, the people cited in article after article say that the 4-day school week is more popular. It is a way to retain their best teachers and attract teachers to those districts. You can increase attendance, decrease student discipline. People can do the tasks that they need to do on that 5th day of school. And according to a survey, elementary school parents preferred overwhelmingly 4-day-a-week school. 69% said definitely 4 days a week. 15% probably. So you're dealing with like 85% right there, while only a small fraction of the others said that they prefer the 5-day school week. So I don't know exactly if these were already parents in 4-day-a-week schools, but the fact is that we have this state public education department and this governor, and we have local control through school boards, and the governor is constantly pushing a governor knows best mentality, trying to mandate policies, whereas local control would dictate that they do what's best for their own district. It might not make sense in Albuquerque public schools or Las Cruces schools, but out in some of these rural communities, it would seem to be an option that works better for them.
Yeah, Paul, and I don't know what's the longest one-way commute that you've ever had in your life on a one-way basis? For
about
me,
an hour.
Yeah, me, I was about an hour and 10 minutes, and boy, that gets old real quick. And I grew up in Southwest New Mexico, and a lot of the ranch kids back in the day, you know what, if you would have driven from their home directly to the school, it would probably be about 25, 35 minutes. But guess what? Buses stop, and they stopped, many, many times. So they were looking at 45, 50, 55 minutes of time on the bus one way. And to have to do that 5 days a week instead of 4. And again, that's much of rural New Mexico. And, there is getting to be increasingly this kind of urban-rural divide in almost everything. The things that are may make sense for Albuquerque, the Rio Grande Valley, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, down Las Cruces don't always make sense out in the plains of eastern New Mexico and other places. And so, I certainly, I appreciate the thought that they say that maybe schools, the test scores aren't what they need to be, and we need to start to look for solutions to those. That's a big admission, by the way. We're last in everything, so that shouldn't be that hard to come to that. But this is a very interesting one, and it's that one size fits all. If there's something that works, we're going to make everyone do it, no matter whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah, and if they have data showing that 4-day a school week does not work relative to a 5-day school week, they need to produce that and make that very clear. It's like so many other policies that we talk about in this state and in Santa Fe. They assert these things, but when it comes to actually basing these assertions on objective studies and detailed reporting, they do a very poor job. And some of the highest performing school districts in the entire state are 4-day per week districts, and haven't seen any evidence that that would be a problem, those 4-day a week, especially given the popularity of the system. Real quick, we haven't mentioned EVs or EV charging stations. Sadly, the Construction Industries Commission, we talked about our testimony at the division. They had public comments separate from the vote. We had attempted, speaking of urban versus rural, we had attempted to get one of the members who was friendly with us, who I won't name on this show, but to get them to make the charging station mandates apply only to the most populated counties in New Mexico, specifically Bernalillo, Doña, and Santa Fe counties, and leave the rural communities out of it because they have very limited interest or utility for electric vehicles. Sadly, that vote happened last week on a 6-2 vote. The EV charging mandates were adopted. So that's going to drive up the prices of commercial development in our state, apartment buildings in our state, all kinds of other costs foisted on people who probably didn't know what was going on, but another unelected board rises up and going to bite New Mexicans in the posterior when it comes to the price of living, cost of living. So anything on that briefly?
Well, I would just say that, it's back to one size fits all. What, there are urban, there are rural. And it's also probably, talk about an inefficient use of capital. There are places where the impact negative, the positives, and assuming I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for a minute and say that EVs are positive, beneficial movement, although that's far from clear. But, it makes sense in an urban area where you have some concentration and you don't have to drive out in these big distances, just like we talked about the 4-day school week. The same thing applies. If you have to drive farther in a day than your EV can charge from your home, that means you're going to be an hour or more if the station's working. And a huge efficiency, a huge safety issue, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that. I think that companies like UPS and FedEx are trying to do some work towards that. The post office in the same boat, although I certainly see them making less progress in the short term. And batteries for long distances in rural America is right now not looking like that's a very easy problem to solve, regulations aside.
Yeah. So moving on, this week in the Albuquerque Journal, there was an opinion piece from a national progressive interest group that deals with taxes and tax structures. And I don't always respond to Albuquerque Journal opinion pieces, but he was basically patting New Mexico on the back for its push for progressive taxation. Interestingly enough, he misdefines progressive taxation in his own article. Now, I will give you the definition that I always use, that we always use, that the IRS uses on their own website, which is that progressive taxation means that the rate of taxation rises as your income levels rise. A regressive tax is much more like the gross receipts tax or a traditional sales tax, where the tax is applied at the same rates to everybody, and therefore people at the lower income level pay a higher percentage of their income or their pay than do the wealthy. So I can see the challenge of a regressive tax, but progressive taxes, especially because they're typically charged on personal income, are awful ways to get more money. And while maybe we could have philosophical debates over what's the right way to tax people, what this guy fails to understand, one, is he claims that when you have a regressive tax, it means the more you make, the less you pay. That is completely untrue. Even on a single rate tax, the wealthy are paying more than the poor. Now, you could argue that because they consume more, they consume a higher percentage, that they are actually paying even more taxes as a percentage of their personal income. Regardless, what you miss in this entire conversation is, what is the impact of your tax structure? And is it a tax structure that encourages or discourages economic growth? And I loathe when people look at New Mexico and they simply say, oh, it's progressive, regressive, or whatever, and they don't look at the fact that our tax structure is maybe not singularly, but it is definitely a very business unfriendly, especially small business unfriendly structure. That is one of the reasons that New Mexico is so heavily dependent on oil and gas and the federal government. So at least if you're going to talk about progressive and regressive, let's talk about the growth impacts of our taxes. And do we need to charge taxes? What's more progressive than eliminating an entire tax on people or making our tax structure more friendly to businesses, job growth, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and Paul, you're getting to a lot of the people that advocate some of these tax structures. It's a very static calculation. In other words, in all things being equal, and all things are not equal when it comes to tax policy, because why? People reorganize their affairs, they make different investments, they put their money in different places depending on what a tax structure is. So it is not this zero-sum game where we can just raise the rates on one group and lower them on another and expect the amount of taxes collected to, and the reason for that is the amount of economic activity to remain the same. It changes. And there is a lot of writing about this, but it's almost it's like once they have their spreadsheet, they say, just look at this. Look at what we can do if we were to just change that rate without looking at what the overall economic impacts are, which is tends to be lost most of the time in these sorts of op-eds, proposals, books, calculations. And history is not necessarily on their side, but they tend to ignore that when it doesn't make their case.
Yeah, and certainly the amount of money taken out of the economy through taxation is not the only measurement of a tax structure, but it is, I think, every bit as important, if not more important, than anything else we discuss in taxation. The city of Albuquerque enacted free buses and has had the program in place since January 1st, 2022. So 2 full years. We always, at the beginning of every year, do a public records request. We did it and talked about it recently for the rail runner. Well, we, of course, did it for the Albuquerque bus system. And I know you're going to be shocked and amazed by this, Wally, but free buses have shown absolutely no discernible impact, certainly not in a positive direction. You could probably make a better case that free buses have resulted in negative ridership growth in the Albuquerque bus system. But as of 2016, when we started collecting this data, the city of Albuquerque buses had about 10.9 million riders on them. By the time of COVID in 2019, so the year before COVID kicked off, that was down to about 9 million. So a decent drop. Then we, in 2020, went down to 5 million. 2021 further dropped to 4.4 million, rebounded somewhat to 6 million in 22, and up to 6.23 million in 2023. But if you look at this explicitly through the pre- and post-COVID lens, we mentioned that the rail runner had experienced a 22% drop in ridership between 2019 and the latest numbers in 2023. The city of Albuquerque's buses were down 30.4% during the same period. So the rail runner has actually recovered slightly better than did the Albuquerque bus system. Now, that is not the only data point you can rely on to throw water on the idea of free buses, but I think it's a fairly good data point to show that Albuquerque's buses are not generating additional ridership from the zero bus fare situation. And again, it boggles my mind that anybody, progressive, moderate, hardcore Republican, which, Dan Lewis, I guess, is the only guy who even could qualify for that, and he opposed the free buses. But the idea that anybody on city council or anybody in government sees free buses as a success, it's baffling.
Paul, it's one of those things. I do a little thought experiment, and if something has utility and great benefit and it's free, it sells out. Just consider for a minute what would happen if we were to have several gas stations that say free gasoline, just think, how long would the lines be and how long would people line up? They would line up as long as you would give them free gasoline. Well, it's been proven now by the marketplace that for a large group of riders, there's costs other than the price you pay as well, just to to ride the bus and pay for your ticket. There's your opportunity costs, there's time costs, there's convenience costs, and what this has shown is that the financial cost can be zero and really doesn't do much, because the problems with the bus system are above and beyond what you have to pay to get on there. They're not convenient, they're not safe, they don't run at the right times. Just these are all potentials, and different people have different ones. But like I say, free gasoline, I bet you that would go on as long as you would allow people to pump it. Free bus service is already shown that's not enough. So what's next? We're going to pay you to ride the bus, and you know what? I think it would be shocking how much they would have to pay to get those buses filled up back to historical levels for people in the Albuquerque bus system.
Please don't give them any ideas, Wally. All right, well, we have one last thing, and this will be, I don't know whether you're going to laugh or cry about this, but I hold in my hands, for those of you who are watching this online, you can go look at this on YouTube, and this is the proclamation that we received recently from none other than Michelle Lujan Grisham's office in celebration of February 6th, Ronald Reagan Day. You can read the proclamation for yourself at heirsoфenchantment.com as well. And we'll discuss it briefly when it's done. We'll just read through this thing. Whereas President Ronald Wilson Reagan, a man of humble background, having been employed as an entertainer, union leader, governor of California, and president of the United States, and whereas Reagan served for 2 terms as the 40th president of the United States of America, the second of which he earned the confidence of 3/5 of the electorate and was victorious in 49 of the 50 states in the general election, a record unsurpassed in the history of American presidential elections. And whereas in 1981, when Reagan was inaugurated president, he inherited a disillusioned nation, shackled by rampant inflation and high unemployment. And whereas Reagan's sunny optimism and strong belief in the power of the individual revitalized the nation in one of the longest economic expansions in American history. And whereas Reagan's commitment to our armed forces allowed America to achieve peace through strength and prepared America's armed forces to meet 21st century challenges. And whereas Reagan's Berlin Wall speech helped in the Cold War and contributed to the demise of the Soviet Union, freeing millions of people from the shackles of communism. And whereas February 6, 2024 will be the 113th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's birth, I, Michelle Lujan Grisham, governor of the state of New Mexico, hereby proclaim February 6, 2024 as Ronald Reagan Day. Now, Wally, a lot of thoughts come to my mind about political life and America as I read this thing. One is, does Michelle Lujan Grisham have a mole on the inside who actually understands the rudiments of free markets and limited government and having a strong military? Or is she just plagiarizing somebody, for lack of a better word?
Or did ChatGPT write this, one of her staff members, and actually it did a fantastic job? And by the way, ChatGPT can do good work, but you need to check it. The other thought that came to mind, and by the way, I'll try not to be too snarky, but it may have been one of those things like Radar O'Reilly, getting the colonel to sign something. They just put it in front of her and she signed it. But this is a fantastic proclamation. Yeah. It does a very good job highlighting the accomplishments of the president. And I'm just going to sit here in the glow of remembering the Gipper and, say, even in New Mexico, we still remember what a great president Reagan was. So,
and I will be slightly more snarky and say, so we requested this as part of an effort with the Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist's organization, which runs commemoration efforts for Ronald Reagan all across the country. And when I was given the request to get a proclamation from Michelle Lujan Grisham for Ronald Reagan Day. I did not exactly have high hopes that I would be able to get any proclamation, let alone one as well written and as clearly understanding of Reagan and his political legacy as this one. And all I can say is that if Michelle Lujan Grisham is so inclined and would like President Biden to get reelected, she should just hand him a copy of this proclamation, perhaps with a few notes, such as he inherited from whom a disillusioned nation shackled by inflation and high unemployment, and individual. What power of the individual would we be referring to? Perhaps Reagan's significant tax reductions that helped turn the economy around, along with getting inflation under control. And then, of course, shackles of communism. They say like it's such a bad thing. I mean, these Democrats nowadays, many of them, like AOC and whatnot, express such support for socialism, but very similar in many ways to communism. So, I think Michelle Lujan Grisham could do herself and her buddy over there in the White House, Joe Biden, a big favor by replacing all of their governance and their advisors with just read the proclamation every day before breakfast, and they will suddenly have a winning game plan for not just the Democratic Party in the United States and here in New Mexico, but also for just the country as a whole, which would be fantastic, because I don't care who is doing the good job. I want both parties to be fighting for how pro-freedom and pro-limited government they are. Finally, we'll say that we're tracking the votes. They're not published yet at the Freedom Index. We haven't really had any significant floor votes, but be prepared. Our website is also in the final process of being updated. We're going to be having a new website rolled out that includes the new Freedom Index information for the 2024 session. And thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.